My name is Daragh Matthews. I'm from Ireland. My talk is on gene flow modelling. Unfortunately for you guys, I've never given a talk longer than 12 minutes, so this could go anyway. So you're kind of like the guinea pigs for me. So the contents of the talk, I'll go through an introduction, some animal breeding basics. There'll be a bit of a repetition maybe with some of the stuff Rodrigo has spoken about. Then gene flow modelling itself, then to actually show you the model and how it's set up, some of the results from the model, and then a concluding slide. So I used to work in an American multinational company, and whenever we had to do talks, they always liked us to do these 4 squares where we introduced ourselves. So I thought it was a good idea, so I said I'd do the same. So a lot of foreigners have difficulty with my name. It's an Irish name. You don't pronounce the GH, so it's just Daragh. I'm originally from the west coast of Ireland, now living in Cork in the south, and I only got married there about a month ago, still going strong. So obviously you know where Ireland is. We're in Romania here. You can see Galway there in the west, so plenty of rain in Galway. That's what it's known for, unfortunately, but I now live down here in Bandon in Cork. So just to give you a bit of background about myself, so I have an undergraduate degree in animal science. I did a PhD in reproductive physiology in cattle. I then studied software development, and I'm now doing a postdoc on the GplusE project. Some random facts about myself, completely unrelated to anything. I travel around the globe, and I once entered a grease pig contest, which I'm sure sounds very random. I was living in America in Kentucky, and it was a competition where the first person to wrestle the pig to the ground. So it was a weird competition to be involved in. So some of my hobbies then, I play tennis, I surf badly, and I enjoy going to the gym and hill walking. So then the Irish dairy industry, we've about 1.3 million dairy cows in Ireland, predominantly Holstein Friesians. We export over 90% of our dairy products, and in 2016 that was worth 3.4 billion to the economy. I understand in Romania you have a similar population of dairy cows, maybe around 1.2 million. So, sorry? 1.5 million dairy cows.
We did export so much.
Okay.
Actually, I think all of them.
Okay, so beef and dairy.
Beef, they are like 60K or something.
Right. Okay. We have just less than beef cows, maybe 800,000 or 900,000 beef cows. So that doesn't include followers. So some of the challenges for the Irish dairy industry is traditionally we had smaller farms, and it's a grass-based production system, which is quite unique. I think maybe Ireland and New Zealand are the most put the most emphasis on grass production system. The UK has a certain amount, but most others is more is indoor production. So your typical Irish dairy farm, about 80 cows, seasonal milking. So to take advantage of the grass growth in spring, we want our cows calving before that, so when they're at peak lactation, they can make use of the cheapest feed available to them. So we dry them off sometime in December, and the majority of them are calving in mid-February. So cattle breeding in Ireland. So it's coordinated by the ICBF, Irish Cattle Breeding Federation. That's the company where I'm based in Cork. It was established in 2000. As a co-op of 30 breeding organisations. So you had herd bucks, you had the Department of Agriculture involved, you had AI companies, you had milk recording companies, all involved to get together to try and increase the genetic gain within Ireland. So that's where we're based, down the south of the country down here, where I actually live as well. This is our building. It's not much to look at, but that's our main office. That's the screenshot from our website. We also have a progeny test centre for beef sires in Kildare, where we buy a certain amount of beef AI sire progeny, and they go on a feeding trial to try and get data for the evaluations for beef sires. We also use it for farm walks and that, and it's a great tool to have to show what we do for farmers, to try and educate farmers. So ICBF are focused on genetic gain through data, genetic evaluations and breeding programs. I suppose the side I'm working on is the kind of breeding program size. So we calculate independent evaluations. So we've no allegiance to any breed society or whatnot. So it means a farmer can trust or may have more trust in our evaluations. And the most important thing about ICBF is we have a centralized database for all records coming in from very varied sources, and it's really the jewel in our crown, and it's worth its weight in gold. It increases genetic gain so much to have it centralized in one place. So this was a cartoon that was in the agricultural press in 1998. So when they were talking about setting up the ICBF, and they were hiring a geneticist from New Zealand, and this guy here in the middle is meant to be from the Department of Agriculture, and the guys in the back are the herd societies and the AI companies. So really the biggest challenge with setting up a centralized database and the ICBF, it's actually political. It's not technical. Technical problems can be overcome, but the political ones are the really ones that are the most difficult to overcome and hold you back the most. So we got there in the end, and this is just a slide showing all the sources of data that we have coming into the Irish the ICBF database, the Irish cattle breeding database. Sorry. So we have records from Department of Agriculture, such as calf registration and movements, stuff on diseases. From milk recording companies, we get it in. We get from the herd books, we get the pedigrees, also linear scoring for beef and dairy cattle. The AI companies, so all the inseminations are recorded on handheld devices and they're uploaded directly to the database. The milk co-ops, so we get the bulk tank milk data, so on farm. The factory supply us data, such as the carcass grade, so on your Europe scale and your fat scale. We get weights from the marts as well when farmers are selling cattle through marts. We have reports coming in from farm advisors. Farmers themselves can record animal events on our website, so they can record birth weights, calving difficulty. They can record weights throughout the animal's life, docility scores. We also get health data from veterinary labs and similar data from veterinary surgeons, and then genotyping. So we have a huge volume of genotypes that come in every year from labs, and that's because in Ireland we have a scheme that's funded by the EU where they put 200 million into genotyping beef cattle in Ireland. So we have we're at about 1.3 million genotypes at the moment. So it's just huge volumes of data. And so when you take it all together, it really is an incredibly valuable tool or asset to have. So the EBI is our selection index for milk in Ireland. So it's the economic breeding index. This is a graph showing the trend in EBI from 96 to 2015. The EBI is made up of several sub-indexes or sub-indices, and it's also showing those here. So so ICBF was set up in 2000, and before that it was definitely for fertility. The general trend was in a downward direction, whereas milk was on the up, but at the cost of fertility. So then in 2002 the EBI was released, and you can see from then it had a bit of an impact and it started coming up. Then in 2005, we introduced Gene Ireland, which is our progeny testing program, the scheme for progeny testing dairy bulls. And then in 2009, we started our genomic evaluations. And so you can see, ever since ICBF has come in, the trend has really risen and continued to rise. So up to 2015, it was estimated that the EBI, the Irish Selection Index, has delivered 600 million additional profit to the Irish industry, and with the current rate, again, it's expected to hit 1.2 billion by 2020. So I mentioned I'm a postdoc on GplusE. So more specifically, I'm working on work package 7, which is establishing the most appropriate long-term breeding strategy for the European population of Holstein Friesian cattle. And so what that essentially means is to build predictive mathematical models investigating relationships between dairy farm profitability, genetic improvement, and genomic knowledge development. So what we try and do is take the situation as it is from a high-level breeding program point of view, try and represent that in mathematical equations, and then project it onto the future. And then once we have all those the equations in place and the variables that go into the equations, we can pull some of these strings of the start. We can change some of the starting parameters to see what effect that will have on the future genetic trend. So that's essentially what this work package is about. So on to animal breeding basics. So like I said, there's a bit of repetition with what Rodrigo went through, but hopefully that could be a good thing too. So the aim of animal breeding is to obtain future generations of animals that will produce more efficiently under future production circumstances. So that's why we're all here. That's what we want to. That's the overall aim of animal breeding. But how do you do that? So you breed the best of the best, but the best for what? And then how do you identify the best? So the best for what is to do with your breeding objective, so the goal for your breeding program, and then how you identify the best is to do with your breeding values. So the ideal situation for your breeding objective is where you have a single criterion that facilitates ranking and it's easy to measure. So the facilitates ranking is obviously hugely important. There has to be variation in your sample, as you all know. I mean, where I work, everyone has 5 fingers. If we wanted to start a breeding program to try and get people to have 6 fingers, it would be impossible because there's no variation in our sample. So this graph is US milk production per cow over time, from pretty historical, from 1924 to 2016. For a lot of this time scale, they would have heavily emphasized on milk production. Towards the end, they would have had other traits, but for a huge amount of it, particularly at the beginning, it might have only been milk production. But then when you also put in the graph then a measure of fertility, which is daughter pregnancy rate, you can see that milk production is going up at the cost of fertility up until around 2000, when they started putting more emphasis on their fertility in their cows. So the breeding goal needs to be a combination of traits specified according to their relative importance. So you can't. And just breeding for one trait will have impacts on other traits, which is going to impact your profitability. So with your breeding objective, which traits must be improved and how important is each trait? So it's the economist's role, and through selection index modeling, to work out what are the most profitable traits to focus on. So it could be milk production, fertility. You might have other traits like that's meant to be a picture of a lame cow, so lameness. You might want to include a certain amount on carcass, because it will have a value, but maybe not as much emphasis. And that's where the the importance comes in. So selection index, in agriculture, the overall aim or goal of the breeding program is to maximize improvement of economic merit. But what is economic merit? So it can be difficult to define because many traits affect the economic merit of an animal. But then you want to rank them. You want your single criterion to be able to rank your selection candidates. So that's where your selection index comes in. Of course, your selection index then is obtained by summing the breeding value for each trait multiplied by a weighting factor based on the relevance of that trait. So here's an example of that equation. So this is the Irish dairy breeding, the Irish dairy selection index. It's the economic breeding index, and you can see it's made up of 7 sub-indices. And within each sub-index, you have your traits. You have your economic weight associated with each trait, and then they've also have the trait emphasis for each trait in the overall EBI. So you can see production and fertility are the 2 largest sub-indices by emphasis. And I mentioned Ireland is a grass-based production system, so that's why fertility is so high for us, because the most profitable cows in Ireland are cows that have 1 calf every year, so that they can make the best use of grass growth. We still obviously have a large emphasis on production, because that is at the end of the day what we're producing. And then we have other traits. You have your calving difficulty traits, your beef traits, so your carcass conformation, carcass weight, maintenance traits, and then more management, and we have a small bit on health. It's not a concrete index. It changes over time, like every good index should, as more traits become available. So process of genetic evaluation. So you want to start with your data recording. So you need your pedigree data. Next, you want your phenotypic records, so sex, date of birth, the herd, conception rate, milk yield, calving difficulty, and obviously the more data you have, the better. So record. Ideally, you want to get all this data and the pedigree information into your centralized database, and ideally then as well your genomic data. You apply your statistical analysis. You get your breeding value out and your accuracy, and then use your breeding values for your selection. So it's an iterative process, so that it goes back again, it starts again. So I said that you breed the best of the best in animal breeding, but another important thing is you want to do it as quickly as possible. And so it's the generation interval that affects this part of your how-to. So the generation interval is the average age of the parents at the birth of their offspring, and it can be reduced by technologies in reproduction. So you could argue that AI reduces generation interval, as it allows younger sires to breed more cows, and then also genomic selection. So a normal a progeny test scenario, you have your calf born. He gets a breeding value based on parental average, and in general, an average figure for his reliability may be around 25%. I'm kind of using accuracy and reliability terms interchangeably here, but they are closely related, obviously. Accuracy being the square root of reliability. So when your calf is born, with its parental average, his breeding value has a reliability of about 25%. And if it's a male calf, when he gets 2 years old, his reliability is still going to be around the 25%. We collect semen off him, when he's 2 years old, or a bit older than 2 years old. You want to do it as soon as possible, really, so as soon as he's mature enough to collect the semen. And then the semen gets put into mature cows. And obviously the more cows that are used for the semen, the better. Then his calves are born when he's about 3. So you get some information such as direct calving difficulty, and that would go into his breeding value. So he might increase a small bit in his reliability. But as generally calving difficulty is only going to be a small part of the index, it's not going to account for much increase in reliability. So then you have to wait another 2 years for your heifers to calve down and to start lactating. During their first lactation and consequent lactations, you collect as much data as possible, and that all leads back into your 5 or 6 year old bull who finally gets up to hopefully around 90% reliability. So he's 5 years old when he has a reliable breeding value, and you can start using him with higher reliability, and his calves start hitting the ground. So that's really impacting the generation interval. So then that brings me to genomics, or to genomic selection. So as Rodrigo was saying, the real advantage of genomic selection is that it can lower your generation interval, or not even lower it directly, but more pick younger sires with more accuracy, the best sires. So in your genomic selection scenario, you still have, when the calf is born, he gets a parental average breeding value, and he's still at about 25%. You genotype him, so in Ireland it's actually a tag from the ear that gets sent off to the lab, and the DNA is extracted, and we genotype them on a 50K chip. It's actually a chip that was made by ICBF. It's manufactured by Illumina. So roughly 54,000 SNPs are on the chip. So once you have the genomic data, you add that to the breeding value, as Rodrigo was saying this morning, and that can bring up the reliability to up to anywhere from 30 to 60% really, but an average might be somewhere around 45%. So then we go through the same process again. So you're still waiting until he's 5 years old to get him very high reliability, but in this scenario, when he's under 1 year of age, he's at 45% reliable. So you can choose your bulls with more accuracy, your best bulls. You can get rid of the worst ones. Of course, as the conversation was saying this morning, there is still a chance that those calves are going to shift a lot in their breeding value, but it just gives you more confidence in your breeding value. So genomic selection, so at a very high level, how it works is you get your highly reliable sires with plenty of data, loads of daughters, so loads of daughter records, and then you actually get as many of these highly reliable bulls as possible. Of course, it doesn't have to be bulls. It's just that in most countries, bulls are the more reliable animals because they have more progeny records. So you get many bulls with many daughters, so loads of data. You genotype them, or perhaps you have their genotypes already, and then the associations are made between the SNPs and the phenotypic data, which Rodrigo was mentioning how to do this morning. So then when your new calf comes along and hits the ground, you can genotype him straight away and compare the genotype of the calf to the genotypes of these highly reliable bulls, and that's why these bulls are called the reference population. So you're just comparing the DNA sequence of this new guy with the reference population. So back to our method. of animal breeding. Breed the best of the best. So the best of the best is the genetic superiority of the selected parents, and as quickly as possible is the generation interval. But the genetic superiority of selected parents in an equation is represented as intensity by accuracy by the genetic standard deviation. And for the predictive model that we've developed for GplusE, this is the main equation that we use to model genetic gain. So your dairy industry structure. So this is generally the structure in most industries. I'll start at the top. You have your pyramid. So you have your best AI bulls. They're used to breed males. Of course, it's not like if they breed females, you're going to get rid of their progeny. But ideally, you're using your best bulls to breed sires. The sires they breed go into the progeny testing programs, and then they're used. So then below the sires, you have your commercial cow population. You have superior dams within this population that you're going to use to breed males, ideally, and then the cows of lesser merit you're going to use to breed replacement females. And of course, there may be females right down at the bottom that you would actually use a beef breed sire on, because their merit isn't high enough to breed replacements. I never said about it. So you also have your foreign bull. This guy obviously is from America with his cowboy hat. So they also have an impact on your dairy industry structure. So gene flow modeling. So I'll just check how we're doing for time. So any questions up to this stage? It's all pretty basic stuff anyway. It's been covered already pretty well. So then gene flow modeling. So as I mentioned, it's about representing the situation that's there presently in equations and projecting it forward. And one of the first papers, and really well cited papers, that models genetic gain is this Rendell and Robertson in 1950. So it's a really old paper, but still cited quite regularly. And that spoke about 4 pathways of selection, and those pathways are the bulls to breed bulls and bulls to breed cows, and then your superior cows to breed bulls, and then your commercial cows to breed cows. So this is the 4 pathways of selection for your population, and it modeled the intensity in each subpopulation. But the problem with modeling in this way is that it assumes an instant shift in the rate of genetic gain achieved. So it doesn't capture the time delays associated with transitioning from one breeding program to another. So it assumes it's instant. So then when you are modeling it, your benefits are going to be a lot higher, falsely higher. So it's important to account for these time delays, particularly when you're comparing short generation interval strategies such as genomic selection breeding programs and long generation interval programs. So your daughter-proof and your progeny test, your daughter-proven breeding strategies. And then also subpopulations exist between the main. You have to account for the time delays when and where subpopulations exist between the main source of genetic gain and a large commercial population, because that's going to add more time, because it has to filter down from the superior subpopulation down to the large commercial subpopulation. So we developed a model to estimate genetic gain when switching between these long generation intervals and short generation interval programs. And we looked at scenarios at different reliability levels for genomically selected bull sires, and also at different levels of foreign sire merit and contributions. So at the beginning, when I was talking about the strings you can pull for your breeding program, these are the main ones that I was talking about. So in your dairy industry structure, you usually have your subpopulation of superior dams, and they're usually concentrated in particular herds, in your better herds. And it's also usually where higher rates of genotyping occurs. So that means when we set up our model for an industry, in the model we have a subpopulation of superior dams, and they make up 10% of the cows in the model. And then we have a larger population of commercial cows, and they're 90% of the cows represented in the model. So the superior subpopulation, the dams in that subpopulation, they're the source of the domestic sires, and they produce both genomically selected sires and daughter-proven sires. And of course, the only difference between these two groups of sires is the age. You also have in the model we have also accounted for foreign sires, and then another variable that we can play with is the contributions from the 3 different sources of sires. So the model itself. Can you see that?
Do you need like?
No, it's probably better going the other way actually.
Well, do you want to see everything?
Yeah, around about 80% maybe.
We are 40% now.
Yeah, maybe about 80. It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So a gene flow model can be created using any programming language. We could have done it in Python. There's a lot of models created in R. But in order to visualize what's happening in the model, it's easier to do it in Excel. Also, it's not computationally expensive, so Excel deals with it fine. So to go through it then. No, just leave it down there. You can. Okay. So I'll just show you here. It's hard. Can you see the colours on that? It's very hard to see the colours.
Yeah, the projector is not reproducing exactly that.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the active is the superior dams. This is the superior subpopulation, and so within your superior subpopulation, you have different categories of animal. So the model was created in 2015. So the superior dams in 2015, their breeding merit was put at 0, and every other group of animal was made relative to the superior dams. So then, going into the future, the superior dams are actually calculated by the calves of those dams multiplied by the proportion of cows at that age. So then the calves of the dams themselves are half of the dam here, as seen here where the cursor is, and then half of the sire proportions. So this is the merit of the genomically selected sires, this is the merit of the daughter-proven sires, and this is the foreign sires. And then they're multiplied by the proportion of sires used that year. So then we also have the selected calves, and they're the exact same equation, except for now they have a selection differential included in their calculation. And so that goes back to the equation that I presented, which was the intensity by the accuracy by the standard deviation of the genetic breeding goal, the true breeding goal. So the genomically selected sires are then just the selected calves from the superior subpopulation multiplied by the proportion of ages of the genomically selected sires. So we're saying genomically selected sires are going to be 2, 3, and 4 years of age. And then the daughter-proven sires is the exact same. Except for they're older. So they start at 5. So they're aged 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. A few of them at 9. So that's the superior subpopulation. The foreign subpopulation into the future, they just it's the merit plus the trend. So the trend of the foreign sires, and that's all parameterized from the starting parameters up here. So you have your foreign genetic trend here. Then you have your what we have called your passive subpopulation, or so this is your commercial subpopulation. And again, you've similar groups of animals in here. And so you have your cows. And going into the future, it's very similar to how the superior cows were calculated, except that we've also included a certain proportion that are sired by stock bulls. And so stock bulls is maybe it's a uniquely Irish term, but it's so they're natural mate sires, and it's a bit of a well, it kind of holds back genetic gain in Ireland because we use them at higher amounts than we should, because obviously the best bulls are going to be in AI versus your stock bulls. So that's the cows. The stock bull sires are AI calves at the particular age. And then your AI calves is half the cow and then half the proportion of the sires. The merit of the sires multiplied by the proportion of the sires. So then the proportion of the sires is calculated. There's two methods within the model to calculate the proportion of the sires, either responsive or fixed. So in fixed, it continues the same level throughout the model, and with responsive, it actually uses this equation. And what it essentially does is it compares the the merit of the daughter-proven domestic sires and the foreign sires, and based on that, it uses a higher proportion of sires with the better merit. And then, as I mentioned, the selection differential is the accuracy by the intensity by the standard deviation, and we've also included an adjustment for highly selected parents. So that's the three subpopulations: the sire contributions and the selection differentials. Then the only other kind of important thing that we also have selection differentials for the cows, which is included, but it's not as high because the reliabilities don't get as high in the cow population. Reliabilities in the superior dams is higher than in the commercial population. So the three things that we change are the foreign genetic trend, which dictates the merit of the foreign sires, and then also the reliability of the genomically selected sires. And so we try those at different combinations to see what effect it'll have on genetic gain for the industry. So that's essentially the model. Oh, where's the other one? So any questions on the model itself? Oh, I left my pointer. Any questions on the model? No. So some of the results then. So I'd say I'll be finished very early. We'll be having an early dinner maybe. Some of the scenario results. So I mentioned responsive sire contributions versus fixed sire contributions. So fixed assumes sire contributions won't change throughout the lifetime of the model, whereas responsive changes depending on which sires have a higher merit. And so that's your domestic genomically selected sires, domestic data-proven sires, and your foreign sires. And in the stable scenarios, they're modeled at a third each, whereas in the responsive or the optimum, they're variable throughout. So then this is the genetic gain from the create date of the model for 20 years into the future, 25 years actually. And it's the responsive sire contributions versus the fixed sire contributions. And when a foreign genetic trend of the same is used, they actually track it exactly the same rate. So this is the mean industry merit, so the average merit of cows. But then when you look at scenarios where the foreign trend is lower or higher, it begins to have an effect. So you can see here the blue line is where the foreign genetic trend is 0.08. So in the base scenario, the trend is 0.1. So foreign 0.08, it's below the domestic trend, and you can see the responsive sire contributions have a greater effect, or they increase genetic gain. And then it's the same can be said for when the foreign genetic trend is higher, but the effect is actually greater. And although this looks like a very small amount between the two slopes, when you multiply that out by however million dairy cows you have in your industry, it can actually add up to millions of euro. So for your responsive versus fixed sire contributions, the responsive increases genetic gain because it maximizes the best sires. So farmers need to base their breeding decisions on the genetic merit. So that's easier said than done, because often farmers' breeding choices are dictated by personal kind of preferences. So if the science is there, getting the science in place is one thing, but it can be hard to actually get your message through to farmers to make the appropriate breeding decisions. So we looked at the effect of genomically selected sire reliability on genetic gain, and this is when a foreign trend is 0.1, so where your foreign trend is the same as your domestic trend, and as you're going from 30% reliable up to 75% reliable in 15% jumps, you can see the effect on the net present value in millions of standard deviation units, so it goes up, and that's to be expected really. So like as your genomically as your genomic selection reliability gets higher, it's important to increase the use of domestic semen. But then we want to see, well, what's the effect of genomic selection reliability on genetic gain when the foreign genetic trend is high. And so we modeled a scenario, we created a scenario where the foreign trend is 0.12 versus the domestic trend of 0.1. So it was 20% better than the domestic trend. And again, you get benefits from using, from the genomic selection reliability increasing. But what you actually see is the increases aren't as great when the foreign trend is higher. And when you model that, when you model an even higher foreign trend of 0.14, so a fair bit greater than the domestic trend, you can see the improvements of going from 30% reliability for genomic selection to 75% are not as high. And like, in order to get up to 75% reliability for genomic selection, takes a huge amount of work and a huge amount of money. So you'd have to ask the question, when the foreign genetic trend is so high, is it worth investing in genomic selection domestically? So the take-home messages then from the genomic selection reliability at high foreign genetic trend is there's less return from improving genomic selection when foreign trend is high. Of course, that's dependent on the fact that your breeding objective is the same breeding objective as foreign sires. So a foreign source of genetics with a high genetic trend can contribute substantially to the domestic industry. So you really have to weigh up if it's worth investing in genomic selection domestically if you have a source of high genetic trend foreign sires. So then we also want to look at the effect of genomic selection reliability on genetic gain when foreign genetic trend is low. So when there's a large GplusE interaction, the foreign genetic trend will be lower. So you can see it here, it's the blue line, it's the bottom line. So in this scenario, the foreign genetic trend is 0.08 versus domestic trend of 0.1. And you can see it's actually increasing your reliability brings about the highest improvement in net present value, which is a measure of your improvement of genetic gain and your standard deviation of true breeding goal. And comparing it to the other scenarios where the foreign trend is either the same or higher, it's a lot better. So it's 0.68. So the take-home message from that then is that there's more reward in investing in genomic selection, starting from a position where the foreign genetic trend is lower than the domestic. And that's very important if a large GplusE interaction exists. So the last set of scenarios then that we modeled was the effect of genomic selection reliability and genetic gain when there's no foreign sire contributions at all. And it's the black line here in the middle, and so you see it here, 0 foreign contributions overlaid over all of the other previous scenarios that we created. And it has the highest improvement in improving genomic selection reliability. And that's because when there's no foreign sire contributions, any improvement you make in your genomic selection reliability is going to have an impact on a higher number of sires, which is going to filter down to your future generations at a higher rate. So the take-home message from that is most reward to be gained from investing in genomic selection as more sires that genomic selection reliability increases in effects. But another thing to bear in mind with this scenario is that if you're looking at the effects of improving genomic selection in your domestic industry, it's imperative that you include foreign sire contributions in your model, as if you don't take them into account, you're going to get false high rate of genetic gain from putting money into your genomic selection models. So this is the graph of all the 5 sets of scenarios, and then the small little numbers are the tags are the foreign sire contributions in those scenarios after 20 years. So you can see when the foreign trend is high, as genomic selection reliability gets higher, the contribution from foreign sires actually reduces, which is to be expected. And it's the same when the foreign trend is 20% greater than the domestic trend. And then in the scenario where there is 0 foreign sire contributions, they're obviously kept at 0 the whole way along. And then the same for when the foreign trend is lower. So then another scenario we wanted to look at was the effect of an industry starting to use foreign sires for the first time. So if an industry had never used any source of foreign genetics, what's the effect at different combinations of foreign genetic trend and the starting foreign sire merit? And these are the combination of scenarios we looked at. So a low genetic trend of 0.08, an equal of 0.1. So in all of these scenarios, the domestic trend is 0.1, and then a higher genetic trend of 0.12. And then we looked at, within these 3 foreign trends, we also looked at high and low starting foreign sire merit. And then the 20-year profits, so relative to a base scenario with zero foreign sire use, the results that we found was that when the starting foreign sire merit is high, there's always an increase in benefits from having a certain level of foreign sire contributions, even when the foreign genetic trend is low. And obviously, as that trend gets better, the benefits also improve. But when the foreign sire starting merit is low, even at a high foreign genetic trend, it doesn't account for the starting merit being so low. And the merit then that was used was for high. It was nearly just slightly higher than the domestic genomically selected sires, a lot higher than the daughter-proven sires, and for the low, it was equal to the starting merit of the cows in the superior subpopulation. So then the take-home message from these set of scenarios was there's no benefit to start using foreign sires when genetic merit is lower than domestic sires, even when the foreign trend is high, and then also even when the foreign trend is low, some value can be added to the industry by using foreign sires. But the thing about it is, over time, as the model progresses, where the starting merit of the foreign sires is high, the contributions from the sires will decrease. The top line there is where you have a high starting merit and a high foreign trend, so it increases a bit and then it drops off and becomes a bit more stable, projected forward into the future. Where it's equal, it actually drops off a bit and then where the foreign trend is lower, it drops and continues to drop into the future. So the benefits you are seeing are probably more from the start of the model. I think that's actually all I have. Probably about an hour, is it? So the conclusions for the model scenarios are to increase domestic semen use as genomic selection reliability gets higher. There's less benefits from investing in genomic selection when high-performing foreign genetics are utilized. A high-performing foreign source of genetic material can contribute substantially to domestic genetic progress, and there's more reward to invest in genomic selection where the foreign genetic trend is lower or a strong GbE interaction exists. So any questions? Yep.
This response and contribution of sires you're talking about, so it's a dumb question. You do that trait by trait, and or it's maybe your final answer is kind of an index based on the traits you evaluate?
Yeah, so it's all based on the index itself rather than trait by trait, yeah.
There's predefined by
Hmm?
the index that you guys usually use, so then you calculate that and compare the fixed and the response.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Right, any other questions? Okay, guess I'll leave it. All right, thanks very much.